Hey everyone, welcome back. We've been getting a lot of requests to take a deep dive into the work of this astrologer named Lorenzo, the self-proclaimed no BS astrologer. And looking at the material you guys sent in, it's certainly intense stuff.
Yeah, his style is very in your face.
Yeah.
No sugarcoating, definitely a unique approach.
So let's break it down. Lorenzo seems to think astrology is a lot more than, just vague predictions and feel-good affirmations. He calls it a battle plan for life.
Yeah, he doesn't really seem to be talking to those who are already thriving. He's focused on the people who are really struggling.
Right, those hitting rock bottom financially in relationships, or maybe just feeling completely lost.
And what's fascinating is he ties these struggles directly to specific placements in the birth chart.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Let's talk placements. Where does Lorenzo say we should look first if we're dealing with financial problems?
Well, he goes straight for Saturn in the second house. Saturn's all about discipline and hard work. And when it's in the second house, the house of resources and values, it can indicate, really having to struggle for financial stability.
Makes sense. But wait, didn't Lorenzo also mention Jupiter in the second house?
Mm-hmm.
And isn't Jupiter usually considered a lucky placement?
It is, traditionally, yeah. But Lorenzo argues that it can actually lead to overspending or maybe even reckless financial decisions.
Almost like there's too much abundance or maybe a naive approach to money.
Yeah, something like that. He emphasizes that even a placement like Jupiter, which we think of as lucky, comes with its own set of challenges.
Okay, so it's not just about the placement itself, but also how we're working with that energy, right?
Exactly. Every placement has its light and shadow, and it's about understanding their shadows so we can work with them effectively.
Gotcha. So let's move on to something that I think resonates with a lot of people. Heartbreak. What does Lorenzo say about those painful relationship experiences?
Well, he points to a few placements that can really stir things up in the love department. One is Venus square Neptune. This aspect, he claims, can make people prone to idealizing their partners, which of course leads to disappointment when reality sets in.
The classic rose-colored glasses effect.
Exactly. Then there's Mars in the seventh house. Mars is all about action and aggression. And in the seventh house, the house of partnerships, it can bring a lot of conflict and drama.
Oh, so you're saying for some people, relationships might feel like a constant battle.
Well, Lorenzo suggests that those with Mars in the seventh might even unconsciously create drama. Like they thrive on that intense energy.
Interesting. Now, he also mentioned another placement related to relationships, Saturn in the seventh house.
Right. Saturn in the seventh can mean slow-burning relationships. They're full of challenges. It's about commitment and responsibility and partnerships.
So not always easy, but there's potential for a really strong bond if you're willing to put in the work.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about something else a lot of people struggle with, that feeling of being lost in life, the existential crisis. Lorenzo connects this to having a packed 12th house.
Okay, can you remind us what the 12th house represents? It's a pretty mysterious part of the chart.
Yeah, it is. It's the house of the unconscious, of all those hidden fears and secrets and karmic baggage. But it's also associated with spirituality and solitude.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Right. And Lorenzo suggests that people with a lot of planets in the 12th house are often pushed into periods of isolation and introspection to face those hidden parts of themselves.
So not always a comfortable placement.
Definitely not. He also talks about hard Neptune aspects. Neptune is the planet of illusion and delusion. And those hard aspects can mean, being more susceptible to deception or self-deception.
Okay, so we've got these placements that can create some serious challenges. But Lorenzo doesn't just leave us hanging with these potential problems, right? He actually offers a way out.
Yeah, he does. And it all starts with understanding transits.
Transits. Can you break that down for our listeners who might not be familiar with the term?
Yeah, so transits are essentially the movements of planets in the sky as they relate to your birth chart, like celestial triggers that activate different parts of your chart at different times.
And Lorenzo says these transits aren't random. They're actually activating those pre-existing themes we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And he also emphasizes the importance of paying attention to those challenging aspects in our birth charts.
Like squares and oppositions.
Right. These can highlight areas where we tend to self-sabotage or get stuck in those repeating patterns.
It's like having a roadmap to those potential pitfalls.
That's a great way to put it. And he encourages us to recognize those warning signs and use that awareness to make more conscious choices.
Actually choose to act differently.
Right.
Now, before we move on, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. This death year cycle that Lorenzo talks about. It sounds pretty intense.
It is. It's where Lorenzo goes beyond the usual Saturn return or Pluto transit stuff and points to this hidden pattern that can predict those really intense periods of upheaval.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Okay, so he ties this cycle to activations of the eighth house, the house of transformation, death, and rebirth, and something called the part of fortune, which represents what brings us luck and stability. When these points are hit by major transits, especially from Saturn, Pluto, or Uranus, it can indicate a time when our sense of security is totally shaken.
So it's like a cosmic demolition crew comes in and starts tearing down everything that's not built on solid ground.
Exactly. And he claims that this cycle can be tracked and predicted, so understanding it can really help us prepare for and navigate those challenging periods.
And he even gives some pretty intense real-life examples to illustrate his point, right?
He does. He talks about a woman whose fiancé left her and basically cleaned out her bank account during her progressed moon in the eighth house. And at the same time, Pluto was squaring her part of fortune. Then there's the guy who lost his business, his wife left him, when Saturn entered his eighth house and Uranus opposed his part of fortune.
Wow, talk about a double whammy.
Right. And then there's this woman who basically went through a complete life transformation during a period when her progressed moon squared her eighth house ruler, and Pluto was conjuncture part of fortune. Like, she left her job, cut off her family, just completely disappeared. Then 3 years later, she reemerged as a totally different person.
Okay, so these death years are no joke. But is there anything we can actually do about them? Does Lorenzo offer any advice on how to navigate those periods?
He does. He really stresses the importance of acceptance, surrendering to the changes, and taking responsibility for our actions, especially when Saturn is involved. He says if Pluto's the main player, resisting change will only make things harder. And if Uranus is involved, it's all about breaking free from anything that feels limiting, even if it seems safe and secure.
So basically lean into the transformation instead of trying to fight it.
Exactly. He also suggests that when your progressed moon is in the eighth house, it's a time for deep introspection, almost like a cocoon phase before a major rebirth.
So even though it might feel intense, it's a temporary phase.
Right. And it's all part of the process.
Well, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive into Lorenzo's world, but we've only scratched the surface. Welcome back, everybody. We're diving deep into the world of Lorenzo, the no BS astrologer, and his, well, let's just say his unique approach to astrology.
Yeah, before the break, we were talking about, how he connects those specific placements in our birth charts to those challenges we face in life.
Right, like those financial struggles, those messy relationships, or even those times when you just feel like, what's the point?
And we were just starting to get into transits and how they can act as triggers for those themes.
Right. So let's dig a little deeper into Lorenzo's ideas about how to navigate those challenges. He calls it an escape plan. But it's not about avoiding the tough stuff, right? It's more about using astrology to understand and overcome those obstacles.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to our birth charts. Lorenzo wants us to look at those challenging placements, not as like curses, but as opportunities.
Right, to actually learn and grow from them. So how does he apply this escape plan to those specific struggles we were talking about? Let's start with finances. What about those Saturn and Jupiter in the second house placements?
Well, Lorenzo's pretty straight up about Saturn in the second house. He says financial stability won't come easy. It takes hard work, discipline, and learning to delay gratification.
No sugarcoating there.
None. He actually says the universe makes you earn stability. No shortcuts, no get-rich-quick schemes. Discipline or disaster, your choice.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
But I guess that's kind of his style, right? So it's about embracing that Saturnian energy of hard work.
Yeah.
And taking responsibility.
Exactly. Now, with Jupiter in the second house, it's a different beast. He's not saying Jupiter in the second house is bad.
Yeah.
But he does caution against, overspending and making those impulsive money decisions.
So even with Jupiter's blessings, there's potential to go a little overboard.
Yeah, it's like too much of a good thing can be a bad thing.
Okay. Let's move on to relationships. We talked about Venus square Neptune, Mars in the 7th house, and Saturn in the 7th. What kind of escape plan does Lorenzo offer for those dealing with, well, heartbreak?
For Venus square Neptune, he's pretty clear. Stop idealizing your partners. He says that aspect can make you see what you want to see instead of what's actually there.
So it's about taking off the rose-colored glasses and being more realistic.
He says something like, you fell for the illusion, not the person. You saw potential instead of reality. And now you're paying the price.
Ouch. That's gotta sting.
Yeah.
But probably true for a lot of people, sadly. Now, what about Mars in the seventh house? How do you escape that constant conflict?
Lorenzo believes that people with this placement might attract drama or even create it. Like they need that intensity to feel
So
alive.
maybe it's about becoming more aware of those patterns
Yeah.
and finding healthier outlets for that Mars energy.
Exactly. Now, Saturn in the seventh house is kind of a different story. He sees this as a path to really deep commitment, but one that's going to be full of tests and challenges.
So it's about being willing to do the work, to stick it out through those tough times.
Yep. He believes Saturn in the seventh teaches us about responsibility and commitment, but the lessons can be pretty rough.
Let's move on to that feeling of being lost. You know, that existential crisis Lorenzo ties to the 12th house and those tough Neptune aspects. What's the escape plan there?
Lorenzo says the 12th house is all about embracing solitude, introspection. He says those periods of isolation, which can feel really hard, by the way, are actually chances to connect with yourself, to face your fears.
So it's about turning that feeling of being lost into a journey of self-discovery.
Exactly. And with those difficult Neptune aspects, he really stresses being discerning, questioning your perceptions and beliefs, and being wary of illusions or deception.
So basically, don't believe everything you think or everything you hear.
Pretty much Lorenzo doesn't mess around. Oh, I wanted to mention something else he talks about in this material. It's this concept he calls astrology for the broken.
Astrology for the broken. I like that. What's that all about?
He seems especially interested in helping people who are going through major challenges, those who feel, as he puts it, broken, lost, or stuck.
So he's really speaking to those who are in the thick of it.
Yeah, and he's saying that hitting rock bottom, whether it's financially, emotionally, or spiritually, is rarely just bad luck. He believes our birth charts hold the key to understanding why we experience these really difficult periods.
So our challenges are, in a way, written in the stars.
He puts it like this. Look, if you're broke, heartbroken, or questioning life right now, don't even think about blaming bad luck. Your chart has been screaming this lesson at you, but let's break it down.
He definitely has a way with words. So he's saying that those tough placements we were talking about, like Saturn in the second house, Mars in the seventh, they're actually showing us where we need to work on ourselves.
That's his take. Those placements aren't punishments. They're highlighting areas where we need to learn and grow.
Okay, so it's not about blaming the stars. It's about taking responsibility and using that knowledge to empower ourselves.
Exactly. Now, remember that death year cycle we talked about before the break?
Oh yeah, the one that sounded super intense.
Lorenzo goes into a lot more detail about it in this material. He calls it the 8th house activation plus the part of fortune destruction cycle.
Catchy. So tell me, what exactly is this cycle? And how is it different from the usual Saturn return or Pluto transit stuff?
Well, he ties it to those major planets, Saturn, Pluto, Uranus, transiting your 8th house or making those tough aspects to your part of fortune.
And just as a reminder for our listeners, the 8th house is all about transformation, death, and rebirth. And the part of fortune is about luck, abundance, and that sense of security.
Right. So when those areas are hit by these heavy hitters, Lorenzo says it triggers a massive shakeup, a sort of destruction cycle where you have to let go of what's no longer serving you.
Okay, so basically, everything you thought was solid ground crumbles beneath your feet.
Yeah, it's not pretty. But the idea is that you come out stronger on the other side. And he's saying this happens more often than Saturn returns or Pluto transits.
Right. And he says that's why so many people get blindsided. They think they're in the clear, and bam.
Exactly. He claims it happens every 9 to 12 years. And he also brings up the progressed moon, which is that symbolic movement of the moon in your chart.
Right, right. And he emphasizes that every 8 to 9 years, your progressed moon will cross your 8th house or square your 8th house ruler, which can bring on all sorts of breakdowns, losses, or rebirths.
It's like a series of smaller crises that build up to that major death year cycle.
Man, Lorenzo does not paint a rosy picture, does he? But I guess that's his whole no BS thing.
Right. But the point is, he believes that understanding this cycle can be incredibly empowering.
Because if you know it's coming, you can at least brace yourself.
Right. You can prepare. You can make choices that support you through that process. He even gives some pretty intense real-life examples to show how this cycle plays out.
Oh yeah, like what?
Well, he talks about this woman who went through a brutal breakup, like a death. Right when her progressed moon entered her 8th house, she was 29, and Pluto was also squaring her part of fortune.
Sounds rough. What happened?
Well, her fiancé cheated on her, left her, and basically took all her money. She went through a complete identity crisis. Then there's this guy who had Saturn enter his eighth house while Uranus was opposing a part of fortune.
This is not a great time, I'm guessing.
Not at all. He lost everything. His business, his house, his wife even left him. He thought it was just a streak of bad luck. But Lorenzo says his chart showed it coming from a mile away.
Yikes.
Yeah.
And he also mentions this woman who went through a total existential meltdown when her progressed moon squared her eighth house ruler while Pluto was conjuncted her part of fortune.
Yeah, she quit her job, cut ties with her family, just vanished. Poof. 3 years later, she popped back up as a completely different person. New career, new outlook on life, the whole shebang.
Wow, these stories are pretty wild, but also kind of inspiring in a way. Like you can go through all that and still come out the other side.
That's what Lorenzo is trying to show us, that these death years, while intense, can ultimately be opportunities for profound change. So does he give any advice on how to actually navigate those periods? Because it all sounds kind of terrifying.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like riding a roller coaster blindfolded.
He stresses acceptance, surrendering to the change, and taking responsibility, especially if Saturn's involved. With Pluto, he says, resisting just makes it worse. And with Uranus, it's all about breaking free, letting go of what's holding you back.
Even if it feels safe.
Especially if it feels safe. He says, if you're in your death year cycle right now, here's what to do. Accept that your old life is done. Stop trying to revive what's already dead. If Saturn is involved, take responsibility, NW. Pay the debts, fix the damage, rebuild. If Pluto is involved, surrender or be destroyed. The more you resist change, the harder life hits. If Uranus is involved, break free immediately. Your security is actually your prison. If your progressed moon is in the 8th, this will pass. Give it 2 years. This is a cocoon phase before your rebirth.
So acceptance, surrender, responsibility, and freedom. Sounds like a tall order when you're in the middle of a death year.
It is. But it's all about shifting your perspective, seeing those challenges as opportunities for growth, not just punishment.
I like that. It's not about being a victim. It's about taking control, even when it feels like everything's falling apart.
Exactly. And remember, these cycles are temporary. They don't last forever.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about Lorenzo, the no BS astrologer, and his pretty intense take on using astrology to navigate all the ups and downs of life.
Definitely intense, but also, really insightful. He doesn't shy away from the difficult stuff.
No, he doesn't. He really dives into the deep end.
Yeah.
But he also gives us a lot of practical advice on how to use that knowledge to our advantage. It's not just about understanding why we go through tough times, but about actually taking control of our charts and our lives.
I think what makes Lorenzo's approach so unique is that he combines that kind of brutal honesty with a really empowering message.
Yeah, he's like, hey, life's going to throw some crap at you, but here's how you can deal with it.
And that awareness is the first step towards transformation. He believes that once you understand those patterns in your birth chart, you can actually start making different choices.
It's like, instead of being a victim of your circumstances, you become the master of your fate.
Exactly. And he really challenges that whole idea that these difficult placements are meant to punish us.
Like, it's not about blame, it's about growth.
Right. He's like, those tough Saturn transits, those Pluto squares, they're not personal attacks. They're showing you where you need to evolve.
And he even suggests that, those really difficult times, like those death years we were talking about, those can actually be opportunities to shed old patterns and really step into a more authentic version of ourselves.
Like a cosmic reset button.
So even those experiences that feel devastating can be catalysts for positive change.
That's the heart of his message. Lorenzo believes that our birth charts, they're not a fixed destiny. They're a roadmap to becoming who we're meant to be.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious about Lorenzo's concluding thoughts. What's the takeaway message for those who are ready to really take control of their charts and their lives?
He reminds us that our charts, they show us our cycles of pain, but they also show us our patterns of power. He says, here's the deal. Your chart shows your cycles of pain, but it also shows your patterns of power. You can either keep repeating the same mistakes, or you can finally say, FCK this, and take control.
It's like a fork in the road. You can stay stuck in the same old cycles. Or you can use this knowledge to break free and create something totally new.
And he gives us some really practical steps to start mastering our charts. He says, pull up your birth chart right now. Right now.
Yeah, he's like, don't wait, do it now. He says, find your Saturn, your Pluto, your 12th house, and really confront the truth of what those placements are demanding from you.
Face your shadow self. head on.
He even asks us to consider, what are they demanding from you? The universe isn't punishing you, it's making you into the person you're meant to be. But you have to choose evolve or repeat.
Wow, that's pretty powerful stuff. It's not about blaming the universe. It's about taking responsibility and actively shaping our destinies.
And he ends with this call to action. He says, are you ready to stop playing victim and start mastering your chart? Then let's fucking go.
Okay, so Lorenzo's approach is definitely not for everyone. But I have to say, there's something really refreshing about you know, his direct, no-nonsense style.
I think it resonates because it's ultimately a message of empowerment. It's about taking ownership of our lives and using the tools of astrology to become the best versions of ourselves. Yeah, it's like he's saying, you have the power to change your life. So what are you going to do with it?
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
But before we go, I want to leave you with this. Lorenzo may be the no BS astrologer, but remember astrology itself. It's not about hard and fast rules. It's a guide, a tool for self-discovery and understanding,
It's about exploring those hidden parts of ourselves, the light and the shadow.
and using that knowledge to live a more conscious and empowered life. So pull up your chart, get curious, and see what truths are waiting to be uncovered. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.